welcome to another episode of Golf Buddies Allowed. Very grateful to my good man Jack McAuliffe here for answering the call fairly last minute. I kind of only messaged him yesterday and said, do you want to do an episode? And fortunately, he's a really sound guy and he's not too precious about short notice, because if he had said no, well, it would have been a Golf Buddy Alone episode today, I think.
I think you both know we never walk alone. That's number one, right? But number two, I have to tell you, I enjoy these so much. And I enjoy the podcast so much. I think it would be easy to be on here and just be somebody who you talk to about this sort of stuff and say, oh yeah, your podcast is great. But I listened to it this morning with Rashmeen right before we got on the call. And I was like, this is such valuable information. If I had to spend 45 minutes listening to somebody talk about a topic that I was supremely interested in, that I thought had a tremendous amount of relevance for my passion, being my golf game, and my life, this would be it. And I thought that the information that was shared in there and the conversation that happened was fascinating, and I really can't wait to dive in. So you could tell me, all you need to do is give me 46 minutes notice if that's how long the episode is, and we're good to go.
Love it. Yeah, so in terms of what we're going to cover today, before I run through what we're going to cover, I'd just like to welcome everyone back. Welcome if you're new listening to either our flagship GYH podcast or this Golf Buddies Allowed format. So as ever, if you want to see us in our resplendent glory, you can sign up to Substack in the show notes. Or if you're just listening on audio, you can hear us in most podcast places. But yeah, so these are alternate week formats where Jack and I get together. We speak about golf, health and well-being. And amongst other things, we reflect on the last guest episode that we had, which was last Monday, where we had Monday the 3rd of March, where Jack has just referred to it there with Dr. Rashmeen Nirmal. So we are most definitely going to get into talking about that. I also want to... Have you watched any of Full Swing Season 3 yet, Jack?
I have. I've made it through the penultimate episode. Just wanted to get that word in there. But yes, so I have one.
All right. Okay, well, no spoilers, please. I'm partway through episode 2 of Season 3. So I just think there's maybe a way that we can almost thread some of what I'm seeing or hearing in that to what we talked about with Rashmeen. I think I just want to share a bit of reflection on the event that I attended at Pitch London last Thursday. I should add at this point, although you can't see it in the camera, Vinny, one of my dogs, is right behind me chewing a very smelly dog treat. And I've actually got another one right here on the desk next to me, which equally smells. So it's quite funny, Jack, because in the last GBA episode you and I did together, Neris, you could hear her crying in the back. It was our episode. It wasn't the one with Rashmeen. And I thought to myself, listening back to it, I was like, oh no. But then at the same time, I was like, that's life. She's raw, part of my family.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Also, I just have to say, Vinny is such a great name for a dog. I love when it's a real person's name for a dog. I think that's the best. So,
if you had to guess the influence for the name, where do you think it's come from?
Man, that's a good question. Honestly, the craziest thing that pops in my head is there's a Sky Sports presenter named Vinny O'Connor. That's the only one I could think of. I highly doubt that's though.
That would be niche. That would be real niche. But it's no, it's Vincent from Pulp Fiction.
Okay, cool. I love it.
So it's one of Kim's favorite movies. I mean, my Vinny's not anywhere near as violent as what goes on.
I can hear the bone, so
you can hear the crunch, crunch, crunch. So yeah. So anyway, I might start with the pitch event, just for listener awareness. As ever, some may have heard of it, even been there, or others haven't. So pitch is essentially the easiest way I could describe it, is an indoor golf venue. It's like an indoor, they've got golf simulators in there. The one that I attended in Canary Wharf last week in London also has a retail outlet in it called Trendy Golf. So Trendy Golf have you come across them, Jack?
Yes.
Are they a US-based outfit as well?
I believe the guy who runs it, Louis, is based in Southern California somewhere, because I know...
Interesting.
I've been introduced to him before.
Okay,
But yeah, no, I
I
know
didn't
Trent.
know that.
Great.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, in a nutshell, so before opening this latest branch, they've already got, I think, one or two venues in London already. They've got one in Dublin, in Ireland. Interestingly, when I was there, I met a guy who is interested in opening in Germany as well. So I think, one of the words that comes to mind is trendy, or there are real kind of like hipster vibes to this place. And I think what's so interesting is it's one of the latest modern expressions of golf. So you go in there and, it was like the who's who, to be honest, of golf influencers. Like in the time I've been on Instagram with GYH, you look around the room and there's various people that you just recognize who are popping up on your social feed and stuff. And I chatted to a couple of them, met some really nice people. I was invited, important to say, by our mutual friend and partner, Mike Harris from The Loop. He was there alongside the other three colleagues of his from The Loop, who I got to meet in person. And yeah, a couple of takeaways from it, other than, like I say, just observing how I think on the whole it's promising for golf that there are venues like that popping up. I think we live in times now where, certainly here in the UK, and you can speak to the US, golf is the culture around golf and the identity of golf is really evolving. And I think venues like Pitch can absolutely play their role in growing the game, quote unquote, or getting more people into golf. But I think it's perfectly acceptable if it, as its own form or format of golf, if you know what I mean, can exist not in isolation. It can coexist in the whole ecosystem of golf. But I would question, and there's maybe data out there that does say this, kind of how are venues like that getting people in to on-course golf? Because I'll put a link in the show notes, but there's a really interesting piece of research that I read that was published in the PGA's Golf Business Quarterly magazine some time ago now, which essentially was saying the industry can run a risk of obsessing about trying to get to graduate people to on-course golf. But if actually any casual golfer or someone that's kind of new to the game or whatever ever wants to do is to go into the safe confines, if you like, of that kind of inclusive space, of modern space, of being in a sim or whatever, that's totally fine. Like that gamified version of golf. Because the reality that you and I both know is when you graduate from that, if you've got no background in on-course golf and you graduate from that to on-course golf, it can be a bit of a rude awakening because it's hard. Like it's different, like hitting off grass versus off like a mat and stuff. So yeah, those are a few of my general takeaways. Any reflections of your own on that?
Yeah, what was so was it a launch event for the
Yeah,
site? Yeah, okay.
it was.
That's great. Yeah, I think the for the brand that I've been working on in the junior golf space, I've dived heavily into all the research done by the National Golf Foundation about golf course participation rates over the last 5 years and how they've evolved and changed. They just actually came out with their most recent one. They talked exactly what you said. The game is growing, it's evolving, it's diversifying. The fastest growing segments in the game are kids, women, and people of color, which is really great to see. And they're all at historic highs right now in the game. And I think the entry point for a lot of those folks is a more inclusive environment that doesn't have the big, dramatic, impending doom that a golf course can represent for a beginner, right? And I would probably disagree slightly maybe with that article because I would hope that I think the effort should be there always to try and get somebody to the course just because I feel like you and I both identify with that being kind of the spiritual epicenter of the game. Like, I don't think hitting the sweet spot on the club, as much as I love that, is the why we play, but being out in nature, being with others, getting a walk outside, I think is, probably my truly favorite part of the game. And I would hope that everybody would get a chance to experience that if they take it up. Um, But I think that the simulator slash off course, like I think one of the research studies that I saw was last year or 2 years ago was the first time that off course participation actually outstripped on course participation, which is kind of a fascinating statistic for the golf industry at large to reconcile with, because now we're getting people interested in the concept, but how do you get them further on down the line? And I think the reality is, do you guys have Top Golf in the UK? Okay. So obviously that exploded, it blew up, it was the biggest thing from the pandemic. Callaway bought them. They were such a big part of their portfolio that Callaway renamed their brand Top Golf Callaway. It was the first part of the brand. And now, unfortunately, for all the people involved, it's really struggling. They had a massive round of layoffs in the last couple of weeks. I know that they're up for sale and they're trying to sell the property, all their properties involved with it. And I think that just shows for anyone who's been to Top Golf, yeah, that was a great kind of V1 of what off course participation can look like. But gosh, there's a lot of room for improvement there, And I think places like pitch, really speak to that evolution of what that process can look like. It doesn't just have to be, what Top Golf was. It can be kind of a different, more curated experience. So, as somebody who owns and operates an indoor golf training studio, I am definitely in favor of the development of making improvements in that area.
So here's a thought for you, Jack. I think the difference between you and some of these other enterprises that you've just mentioned, your why for what you do drives a lot of your vision, right? And I just wonder, so if I were to speak to the owners, say the founders of Pitch and or the founders of Topgolf, they may say that they're trying to grow the game. But then when you look around, like Topgolf, for example, their company values and their mission statement, their vision, to be fair, does actually, I have to find it, but it does, I remember it making reference to essentially making the game more accessible and more inclusive, right? So like their starting position around why they're doing what they're doing is for good reasons. But at the same time, I think we've got to remember that they're very much a profit-making enterprise. And so do you see Callaway are now trying to sell them off or have sold them?
They're trying to.
Why?
Because the numbers are horrible. They were massive during the early years of the pandemic for group outings, for parties, for corporate events, for people getting out of the house, being able to do something that was socially distancing. And I think they grew pretty big pretty quickly and developed a lot of locations. And then I think, they also positioned themselves at, first of all, I'll address kind of one of the things that you said. When they say, we're about inclusive and growing the game, that in and of itself is a profit-making strapline because their target market is beginning golfers, right? So that's who they're going after to begin with, which is fine. That's exactly what they should be doing. But yeah, I think they grew kind of too big too quickly. And, like I said, they also positioned themselves as a cheaper alternative as an entry point to the game, right? So, you don't have to go to the course and spend, all that money on the cart and the tee time and the balls and all this different stuff. Come to Top Golf and, it'll be a kind of a cheaper entry point for you. Well, I went on a date there a couple of years ago for my kind of first time going. And after the 2 hours of playtime and food and drink that we had, it was, $180, $200, something like that. So and that's how they monetized the whole thing, was through the food and bev side of things, the play side. So I think, who am I? They're a very successful business. Who am I to comment on it? But I think that it's interesting to see them kind of caught between two stools in that sense of being this entry point that's all about access and opportunity, and then trying to make a profit and trying to get lost in a little bit of that middle ground.
I think the thing where I'm going with this is there already coming a point of saturation in that market where more and more people are swimming in those waters in terms of like indoor golf venues? Because there's more and more of them. Like there's one that just popped up near me. It's an independent one, right? So it's not linked to any big sort of like franchise like Top Golf or any of these places. There's clearly a market there, and those who will do it well will, because again, pitch actually I don't think it's a different target audience. It's not families that they're going for there. they're kind of positioning themselves in like big cities and like inner city venues and stuff. So it's like, kind of working professionals. But I guess what I'm also saying is it would be amazing if they were, if it turns out that they're doing it partly for reasons to help the wider ecosystem of golf and to help graduate people to on-course golf. It, to me, feels that these sorts of places that we're talking about, that almost happens as a natural, organic thing. That's what the industry would hope for, rather than there being a deliberate pathway into it, if you get what I mean.
I always think of it as the old like Wrigley's chewing gum. There's a reason they make the chewing gum stop having flavor after 10 minutes because they wouldn't sell a whole pack of chewing gum if it just lasted forever.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Just have to have a sustainable model where they're keeping people to come back to the indoor facility and not just saying, hey, do this for a month and then go graduate. I don't think anywhere in their overarching business model it should say, we need to get you to the golf course. I would just hope that somebody who experiences that process would make the connection, say, man, this gamified version is amazing. Imagine what it's like in real life. Because I feel like somebody whose only relationship with the game is strictly at a top golf venue or strictly at an indoor facility, who never experiences the joy of getting outside in nature, even on a pitch and putt or a par three course, is missing just really the true essence of the game right there. So from a business perspective, of course, they should focus on their business model, not have that idealistic minded nature in it. But I guess I hope for the growth of the game in the future that people are able to make that natural connection themselves. And just going back to your point about the saturation, it's massively saturated, right? I think we're in a little bit of a bubble right now as it relates to that. There's a facility by me who somebody was there yesterday. They talked about opening 25 different locations across Southern California and a few other areas. And honestly, there's nothing really distinctive about them. It's just an indoor golf facility. And I think they've made a killing in the spot that they're at. And like, oh, if we could just times it by 25, great. It's like, I don't know if that's the right move. So I think it's about creating experiences that are unique to prevent that saturation. If you're just another indoor golf facility, then you're going to get wiped away in a few years, I would think, with that oversaturation, in a similar way that Topgolf, struggled after that initial thing. They didn't really grow and evolve their offering that much. I think in my opinion, and again, I think we've talked about this a little bit, but the golf facility that the RNA created is, in my opinion, what that next evolution of an off-course golf experience looks like. They have the little, place there. I think it's like a par three course or an outdoor range, or they have some sort of outdoor venue, right, that you can do stuff. But it has all these different elements that are, hey, are you interested in taking your first step in the game and going on this pathway? Here's a great place to do that.
So, now that you mentioned Golf It, so interestingly, I spoke with someone the other day someone who, put it this way, is quite senior in a golf business and has plenty of skin in the game as it relates to, kind of, let's say, golf politics, golf governance, and the industry at large. He was saying to me how he struggles to understand why the RNA chose to put Golf It in Glasgow, of all places, or even the UK for that matter, because he was making the point that the RNA are a global institution. And often something that gets levelled at the RNA is that they are too Britain-centric in terms of their almost marketing collateral, if you like, and the people that they sort of pin up and things like that. Okay. Now, I don't have a particularly strong view on that. I think it's an interesting observation. Now that person has mentioned it to me, yeah, it might make me pay closer attention to it and have more of a sort of a interrogative eye, if you know what I mean. But the key thing he said about Golf It was, his argument was why. So again, back to this point of growing the game. Why not choose an emerging economy like India or somewhere like that, for example, like a place where there's arguably more of a need for it, because I think part of his thing as well was like Scotland's a home of golf. Like, you know, I pushed back at him and I said, well, okay, but devil's advocate here, there are across the UK, and comparatively speaking, there are a lot of social issues in Glasgow. There's a lot of poverty. There's a lot of young children that are probably coming from families with addiction, and sort of, you know, there's all sorts of social issues going on. So you could argue that actually putting a facility like that, and with all the health and well-being benefits for the community and stuff, is a good thing. And his answer to that was, yeah, but if that's the case, if that's why you're doing it, why not just take that money and actually pump it into golf clubs and help them with wider community outreach? So it's one point of view on it, but it was an interesting observation.
I feel like you and I should go for our first in-person experience to go there and check it out. And I think just to kind of answer that question, I feel like they need to, it's a proof of concept, right? It's a never before done operation. If you put a never before done operation in a place that's thousands of miles away in a
True.
region that's not under your thumb, that you can kind of have an active role in development and, you know, growth of, that's a significantly more challenging prospect than doing it in a place where you're around. So I would imagine, okay, we had all this profits from the 150th Open Championship. Let's create this kind of first version of this in our hometown and kind of see how this all works. And if we can franchise it in a certain type of way and move it to these emerging markets eventually, to me, that's 1,000% the second, third, fourth step in the process. How is Mike doing, by the way? I'm only kidding. Just that's who you were talking to.
It wasn't him. Funnily enough, it wasn't him. But it totally was. No, it wasn't. It genuinely wasn't. It was not Mike. But what was good? That's such an astute observation. That's such a good point, actually, about the proof of concept. I think that's very fair. Yeah, they put themselves on a sounder footing to be able to evidence the benefits of it to the business case before they then scale it out wider. So anyway, let's go to the Rashmi Nirmal episode. So again, to you, our listeners, if you haven't listened already, please do. It's available in all the podcast platforms and in both audio and video on the Substack. So get subscribed for free in the show notes. Jack, what did you take away from that one?
Like I said at the beginning, when I tuned in and I heard the little strap line of kind of what the conversation was going to be about, especially with her background. So what is her actual title? Was it a neurodevelopment specialist?
Yes, I can't remember the exact title, but neurodevelopment, and specializes in people, you know, sort of treating, especially young adults with neurodiverse conditions like autism. She's also I think she's like, she's in academia as well. She's like a lecturer, and she's a registered psychologist. But really what she's trying to branch out into now is taking all of her professional and academic expertise and applying it to golf and working with golf athletes of all sorts of levels.
Yeah. So I just so grateful whenever we get somebody who has such a remarkable academic background apply their expertise to this hobby that we have, basically, right? She's doing such profound work in really helping people, you know, in those different situations that, you know, this is true life skills that's going to help them develop. And then she has this massive interest and passion for golf because of her playing background and seeing the kind of the crossover between golf and life, which is obviously what this podcast is all about, and being able to apply that and see those different lessons. It's like, it's such a window into the world through a lens that's an expert's lens, right? And I think that was kind of my main takeaway from it. And I think she touched on themes that, you know, you are kind of growing and exploring and like really hammering home to people over and over again, right? Like resiliency, I think, was the key word that I heard talked about over and over. The fact that the hard times are what's needed to grow. And I think that's why golf is such a microcosm, right? Because if you can handle that blow up hole on that course, that bad break, that one bad swing, that whatever, and not, as my dad always told me from a very young age, don't compound the mistake, right? and just take that mistake in it by itself and move on with resiliency to the next step. That's the massive part of the game, and that's a massive part of life. I thought, it's very interesting because she talked a little bit about how, there's all the swing coaches and the putting coaches and the short game coaches and not so much kind of these performance coaches. And I think I almost think we're at a point where, going to Full Swing for a second, did you watch last season's Full Swing?
I did, yeah.
So when Wyndham Clark was with his performance coach, Julie, I think her
Yeah.
name was, I almost think we're at a point where it's still in the realm of being a competitive edge. And I honestly think that there's a reticence from some of the elite players to share all of the work that they're doing in this area, because it's truly something that they're garnering an edge from in their playing capacity. An example of that is, I was listening to an interview that Ludwig Oberg gave after he won at Genesis at Torrey Pines. And he's just the epitome of cool, calm, and collected, right? Like golfing robot, essentially. And he was like, yeah, I got very nervous out there. He's like, but I employed some breathing techniques. And someone's like, oh, like, what was the breathing technique? Oh, I was just doing some box breathing. And he said it so casually and so like under, kind of the radar. And it's like, if you look at all these different kind of performance coaching things that are popping up, there's one called Flow Code, which a lot of the juniors out here use, which is Rick Sessinghouse's program. He works with Colin Morikawa, and it's all kind of box breathing exercises, like changing your focus to help with performance. So I think it's such a part of the process that these guys aren't really talking about explicitly right now, because don't want to share it with everybody. But I do think we're kind of hitting that critical point where if you're not doing it, you're really missing out. So I thought that was interesting. And then all the micro habits, and was it Brad Gilbert was the coach, right? And having your bag set up. I'm literally the worst in the world at that. When she said you have to take the wrappers, like the old sandwiches and stuff, out of your bag, I was like, that hit me right here. I have like 3 old PB&J wrappers. And my bag is always a mess. I'm always like scrambling for my teas. There's a little hole in my bag. I always have to dig in and try and get my tea. And I have kind of my big tournament for the year is coming up next week. And I literally was like, I need to just like organize my life / my bag, and that's going to make me feel better. So I think that need for structure and the limiting of the cognitive load was a fascinating conversation. It's such an interesting part of elite performance and development. I'll just share a funny story. There's a football coach here named Jim Harbaugh, who he now coaches the Los Angeles Chargers, but he was the head coach at the University of Michigan and head coach at Stanford, and he's a very successful coach, won a national championship. And his deal is he wears the same outfit every single day. He wears khakis, a mock turtleneck, a hat, and like a Sharpie necklace around his thing. And so his wife will post pictures on social media of her going to Marshalls or TJ Maxx or Target or whoever and buying just like 28 pairs of 34, 32 khakis, right? And they're like, why do you do that? Steve Jobs, same sort of thing, right? Wear the same outfit. And so Jim Harbaugh's line was, it reduces drag, right? So when he opens his closet in the morning, he doesn't get decision fatigue. He's got his outfit, he puts it on because he has to go make a million other decisions throughout the day, and he doesn't want to think about that. So I think about the more that you create structure and routine and organization as it relates to your golf game, that frees up your mind to not feel overwhelmed on the course, which I thought was a fascinating insight.
I love that Jim Harbaugh example because actually, in a way, it's like, there's a certain individuality to that as well, and not caring what other people think, because it's like, this guy's dressing the same way every day. Like, what a square. Has he not got like an expansive wardrobe? But he's like, nah, like, this works for me. And I that's, but it's the marginal gains, isn't it? And I just love that stuff. And actually the cognitive load, I agree. I listen back to my episodes quite a bit because I have to for editing purposes, but also because I just think I love what we're doing now, because you pick up certain things and I pick up certain things. But very timely that she mentioned cognitive load, because you and I have been speaking about habits over the last few episodes, and it ties back to something James Clear says in Atomic Habits, which is there's this debate where people get into saying, but surely if I spend time trying to intentionally develop habits, that's almost filling my brain more, if you know what I mean. But he says, no. And Rashmeen says it as well, is by developing these micro habits, you reduce the cognitive load. So actually, like, the understated benefit of having a well-organized bag, having your teas ready so that when you walk to the first tee, because honestly, Jack, like, the number of times, like, number one hole is where my scorecard gets off to a bad start all the time. And honestly, I think a lot of it can be put down to preparation levels. Because if you're rushing onto the first tee, feeling rushed or disorganized, then it has an impact. And I think she touched on it there. I think for me, one of the most compelling and standout parts was around, why for her raising awareness around mental health is so important in golf and even generally. And there was an element to what she was saying where she started off by talking about how when she was a golf college athlete, she found that there were aspects of the game that frustrated her, or the bunker game would let her down. And she didn't feel supported, is what she said. And I guess she then led on to, so building on that point, it made me think that a prevailing theory that I have is that those people who pay attention to their mental health and care about their mental health are kind of more likely, when they go onto the golf course, in a better position to be able to almost handle the emotions that they experience that arise in golf.
1,000%. I think it's the same thing, right? Like if you struggle with anxiety or depression, or every little thing bothers you in life, when you get on the golf course, that's going to express itself as well. So if you're mindful and intentional about that, you have the tools.
Yeah, and I love also then how she talked about, which is a theme we speak about and has come up often on this podcast, is the pressure on elite athletes, that they're almost like fictional characters, I think is how she described it.
That was a great analogy.
And I think, yeah, it was. And it, again, timely with Full Swing on Netflix, where, like, for instance, in episode 2 of season 3 that I've just started watching, there's this bit where there's like this joke between Rory McIlroy and Shane Lowry, where Rory McIlroy says, "Are you okay if the Netflix cameras come along? And I just, so that I could get them off me for a while and put them on you instead, Shane." And that made me laugh but in a serious way, because that is the world that those guys live in. Like, every word that they utter, there's cameras in their face all the time, and the pressure is high. And I think she said something like, it is incredible that these athletes are able to perform the way that they do, despite having all manner of pressures being put on them behind the scenes. And that's not right, is what she said. And I couldn't agree more. But maybe one of the final things around this whole mental health awareness, that if I heard her right, that was tied to that topic, was safeguarding in sport, and essentially child abuse in professional sport. And that really struck a chord with me, because I trained for the community golf instructor program to teach juniors and get anyone, adults, into golf. And as part of that training course, I had to attend a child safeguarding course online. It was heavy, Jack, basically giving you case study examples of who have been, in sports coaching. And it was intense. Like I say, it was just kind of it was quite harrowing as well, but it just made me realize, actually, child abuse, sexual abuse, completely deplorable and unacceptable, but almost like the intensity, win at all costs mentality. That was something else that she said as well. Sometimes can spill over into bullying and harassment, ultimately, is what I'm seeing in those environments. So I wondered if you had a perspective on that, because again, you work with juniors, and I don't know what it's like, some of the things that she talked about there, if that resonates with you at all.
Yeah, I think, when you do the sign up to be a coach for the First Tee program, you have to go through this online training exercise that talks about safeguarding in sports and kind of your responsibility as a coach. And it's a big responsibility, right? Because parents are, giving you access to their children, and you're responsible for taking care of them and educating them and helping them develop over the course of an hour or two a week. And the sort of environment that you create therein is hugely important because of how impressionable kids are, and they're all bringing different experiences to the table. It's a wide variety of kind of perspectives and energies and personalities that are there. And you have to kind of be able to absorb all of that and create a safe, fun, engaging environment for the kids. And that, obviously the situations where that hockey player story that she mentioned, where hundreds of
Yeah.
times he had been abused by his coach, and how that relates to the gymnastics team and Simone Biles and all those awful stories. It's like, to see people take that responsibility and abuse it, or that leadership role and abuse it and take advantage, is just about the worst thing that you can do. And I think having those difficult conversations, bringing those topics to light, and giving people more understanding of what that looks like and how it can, look into the bullying side of things. We could talk about that, like how it can go from the win at all cost to that sort of things, and then the effect that that has on the individual and the athlete and the kind of ramifications down the line, I think is incredibly important to talk about. um, I'll just share this because, kind of what she was talking about with the resiliency and the hard times and how this helps you develop. Just to bring it to our soccer connection for a second, there was a really wonderful interview this week that they did on the overlap breakdown with the former, I don't think he was the head of recruitment, but he was a big figure in Liverpool's recruitment team, right? He was one of the scouts, data analysts, whatever he was. So they fascinating conversation about what do Liverpool look for in a player, right? And, physical robustness, all the data, all the stuff that they want to see. But the number one thing is character. And they talked about
Hmm.
how they had signed all these different players who had been relegated from other teams. And you would think, why would I sign Andy Robertson when he got relegated from Hull? Why would I sign Gini Wijnaldum when he got relegated from Newcastle? Clearly, these guys are losers, right? But the resiliency that they have to go through those hard times, the resiliency that Mo Salah, Roberto Firmino, and Sadio Mane had in their upbringings, where they had to go up and go down and go up and go down and figure that process out. That's what truly creates elite development and elite performance at the highest level, is callousing your mind and your heart and your soul to those experiences, that when adversity hits on the pitch or on the golf course, you're ready to meet it with the right attitude. So I just thought that the win at all costs, what it leads to bullying, it leads to not great behavior, it's missing the point. It's also not the right way to develop, right? Like so I think it's such a fascinating intersection of all those different themes that we talk about so much. And I was very glad that she brought it up.
Yeah, that you make me think of something in Start With Why by Simon Sinek, where he talks about there are different methods and behaviors that human beings can use to drive high performance. And one of the age old ones is basically threatening people, like basically saying, if you don't do this, you're going to fail, or I'm going to make life really difficult for you, and it elicits a response, which is like the threat drive kind of makes someone go, oh, right, I'm going to up my game. Do you know what I mean? Um,
Listen, I being around the junior golf landscape for the last 2 years, I've seen some things that have blown my socks off in the way that parents treat their kids. There was one specific instance where there's a dad, and they are part of the whole process, right? Every time they practice, they're at the range with them. Every time they play in a tournament, they're there with them, which I don't think is the right thing to do. I think you're supposed to develop a little bit of individuality in a sense of, I have to handle this on my own. I don't always have my backup plan there. But the interesting thing that this one parent shared was, when their daughter starts playing poorly on the golf course, let her know that he's frustrated. He will walk off the golf course and stop following her because she's not playing well. And that will be the signal, like, of course that's what I do. Like, if you're not playing well, why would I be out here? It's like, who taught you like anything about mental training, about mental development, about what a child needs and that sort of thing? And it's like, unfortunately, that's relatively pervasive amongst kind of parents who are striving to develop elite athletes. And I think the more conversations like this that you had with Rashmeen that kind of break down those myths are vitally important.
Yeah, for sure. I was going to add, I mean, you've mentioned it already, but her take on embrace the rough, cherish the fairway, adversity, resilience is really one of the best I've heard on the podcast so far, and it makes me think about. I'm going to give a honourable mention. It's your honour to a guy called Chris. I don't know his surname actually, but we met through. So he's another guy who. He and his brand Mimo Golf, MYMO, are represented by the Loop. And basically what he does is he's created like a golf art business. So he's like a graphic designer, artist who does prints of iconic golf holes, but specifically the origin story was around he made a hole in one on a certain par three or something. And he's like, I want to capture this moment and frame it. And he saw a gap in the market for like art like that. And so he's created this and he's got a thriving business. But the reason I'm bringing him up was because he and I spoke on the phone the other day. I was telling him about GYH, what we stand for. And he said this amazing thing. He was like, the amount of people that he speaks to who aren't golfers, who have thought about golf in the past and have ruled themselves out of playing it, not because they don't think they don't fit or they don't belong there, but because it's too hard. And I just thought, wow, there's something really in that, because in life, we try to avoid difficult things at all costs. We'll take the easiest route sometimes, but it's if you face up to hardship and to resilience, if you face up to difficulties and challenges, that's where there is growth. And like she said, when you're in the rough, that is opportunity. And to play golf. And what Chris said made me go, that's it. If I could capture anything about the essence of golf yourself healthy, golf makes you healthy because it teaches you skills. It forces you into adversity and you learn from it.
100%. I had an experience last week when I was playing on the course where, like I said, I'm preparing for the Southern California Mid-Am qualifier next week, which is kind of the thing I build my whole calendar around. And I've been in the wilderness in my golf game for 6 months. Even my dad, when your dad says something to you, because I play with him every Saturday. He's like, I wasn't going to say anything, but you have like not been playing well. I was like, I know. I've been.
Was it him you were talking about? Has he walked off the golf course when you're playing bad? Are you right?
No. He's very supportive. He's fantastic. And I got to the sixth hole last Saturday, and I was 6 over through 6, and I was just like, "What are we doing here?" And I said, "You know what? I was actually thinking about this podcast, and I said, we need a mantra for the rest of the day. Like, we are just going to fight. Like, we're not going to, like, if we make a bogey, we hit it out of bounds, we three putt, we whatever, we're not going to take this as an affront to who we are as a person. We're not going to let golf define us. We're going to be defined by our ability to encounter these situations with grace, right? And just do the absolute best that you can. And wherever the chips fall, they fall. But being able to handle that process with grace and compassion while striving your hardest, I think, is the ultimate goal, and that's the goal for life. Along with those lines, if I'm able to give an honorable, your honor mention, I'm reading a book right now. I know Rashmeen said she's going to start a book club, and I would like to get in on that as well.
For sure, yeah, I'll connect you up, yeah.
I'm reading a book right now that was given to me by my friend's mom, who has given me some great books over the years. She's an avid reader, and it's called Inner Excellence by Jim Murphy. Fascinating book. He is the great 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 grandson of a samurai family in Japan, and so it's a lot of the lessons that are applied from that. And there's just a couple things that I wanted to mention. So he works with a lot of golfers. There's a lot of golf commentary in there. And there's an old golfer named Chichi Rodriguez. Do you remember that name at all? Who like did the sword when he made the putt? Great player.
Well, he passed away recently, didn't he?
He passed away recently, yeah. So he had a quote in there where he said, like talking about like praying in golf, and he said, "I never pray that I make a putt. I pray that I respond positively when I miss one." And I was like, wow, that's like flipping everything on its head, because he recognized that that's the most important thing that can happen in that moment, is not making that one individual putt. It's being able to respond to the missed putt correctly to allow yourself to continue to grow and improve. And the other part was, they infuse a lot of the kind of samurai ideology, which I think is fascinating, the whole Bushido code. And one of their mantras before heading into battle was expect nothing, prepare for anything. And I think there's so many times when I let my golf ego get in the way, where I say, I'm a 2 handicap. I should be shooting, 73 on this golf course. And then I get 6 over through 6. This isn't me. And you start having all that, like all these expectations of who you are as a player. It's like, well, today you're not. Today, this is who you are. Like there's a number on a scorecard, and that's what your game is today. It has nothing to do with what happens. You can't have those expectations, but you do need to be prepared for anything. Like literally anything can happen out there. She mentioned the rain situation on the golf course and just having that little stuff, right? So I think if you embrace every round of golf and every day with that expect nothing but be prepared for anything, I think that's just a wonderful mindset to put yourself in.
Yeah, and something you say there reminds me of a quote from, you mentioned Ludwig Oberg earlier on episode 1 of season 3 of Full Swing. He's being interviewed after one of his, it's like round 3 at the Masters last year. And he was like, it was tough out there today, high winds and stuff. I just had to remember to keep having fun. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? Like, it's just like, but I was like, we need to get him on the podcast, Jack. We need to ask him about that. Be like, how can you, of all people, have that mantra? Because if he can, we can.
I would bet my bottom dollar that he is working with an elite performance coach, because the amount of wisdom that comes out of that young man's mouth about how to think about the game, it seems almost childlike. Just have fun, just do my best, don't have any expectation, like all these little things, like working on my breathing. Like this he's kind of the template, in my opinion, for what elite golf mindset looks like right now.
So anyway, I reckon that is probably all I have time for today, because I've got to now go and order the takeaway order from the local Indian restaurant, the same one that I mentioned that I ordered from after the Selena Samuela episode the other week. No, my nutrition habits haven't come on very well since then. It's quite funny. I got a phone call yesterday or the day before, Jack, from the health insurance provider that I've got through my 9-to-5 job. And they're like, oh, Mr. Lynch, hi. Just to remind you, you do your free health assessment. I was like, now's not a good time. Can you bring me back? I was like, yeah, I'm not interested in being healthy today. Thank you, bye.
Let me get 2 months under my belt of feeling better about myself.
But no, honestly, it felt so ironic. So in the moment that they called me, it was like probably the moment when I most needed my health assessed, because I was really stressed with work, and I was standing there like trying to figure out some life admin thing, and I was like, not now, please, not now.
I don't have time to do anything else.
Yeah, exactly. So golf yourself unhealthy. Yeah, but anyway, Jack, pleasure as always. Look forward to the next one. Until the next time, folks, embrace the rough, cherish the fairway.